Okay, I think we're ready to begin. Welcome everybody to the November installment of the SciComm Lunch-and-Learn. The SciComm Lunch-and-Learn is a series that's sponsored by the Duke Initiative for Science and Society at Duke University. I'm Jory Weintraub, and I'm the Science Communication Director with the Science and Society Initiative, and I will be your host for today's session. For those of you that are new to the SciComm Lunch-and-Learn series, welcome. If this is your first time, we're happy to have you here. For those of you who are returnees who participated before, welcome back. We're always pleased to have returnees to this series. If you're not familiar with it, it's a monthly series in which we explore any and all aspects of science communication. Anything that seems interesting to us is fair game for the series. We've got a really interesting one today with a wonderful speaker who's a good friend, so I'm very excited about today. Quick business announcement. This is our last SciComm Lunch-and-Learn of the year. We're going to take a December break, but we will be back in January. We've already got a full lineup of speakers lined up for the spring semester, and so we will be back in January. And I encourage you to check the SciComm Lunch-and-Learn website to get updated as we will be putting all that information there. So stay tuned for a great lineup of speakers in the spring, and we're glad to have you today. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce today's presenter and my good friend, Dr. Holly Menninger. Holly, I think you can turn your video on at any point if you want. And that way we can see you as I'm gushing about you and saying wonderful things as I introduce you. So Holly is the director of the public engagement, Director of Public Engagement and Science Learning at the Bell Museum, which is located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and is the State Natural History Museum of Minnesota, and is associated with the University of Minnesota as well. At the museum, she oversees exhibits, the museum's planetarium, K-12 programs, public programs, among many other things. We're going to hear all about all of the cool stuff she does today. Holly has done, I was going to say a little bit of everything. She's actually done a lot of everything. She's sort of amazing. She's done it all: science communication, science education, science outreach, science policy, citizen science projects. And she even for several years hosted a show on WICB radio in Ithaca, New York called Science Cabaret on Air. She was the co-host and producer of that show. Holly is an entomologist by training, and if you go to her website, you will see cool pictures of her with insects crawling all across her face, which is always fun. She has a BS in biology from Denison University and received her PhD from the University of Maryland in behavior, ecology, evolution, and systematics. And as I said, she's an entomologist by training. So I'm going to hand it off to Holly. She's going to tell us a bit about her exciting work at the Bell Museum and a bit, I think, about her sort of work history that got her there. There will be plenty of time at the end for questions, so I encourage you all to type your questions into the chat box, and we will do our best to get to all of the questions that we have. With that, I am happy to hand it off to my good friend, Holly Menninger. Take it away.
Thanks, Jory. Thanks for that kind introduction. And I've been like waving furiously because people like are quickly turning on their videos, and it's so fun to see so many friends and colleagues. Hi, Karen. From past portions of my life. So hopefully I'll give shout outs, even like way back. Bruce Lewenstein, I see you. And I'm excited you are here as well. So this is super fun for me today. You know, I miss North Carolina, particularly on a day like today, because we have a snow squall coming through. Yay, hooray, Minnesota. But in addition to the weather, I certainly miss all of my friends and colleagues from across multiple institutions, and particularly my skunks, the science communicators of North Carolina. I miss you as well. Also, I might miss just a little bit Bojangles, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, and we ordered the seasoning to come in to put on our tater tots. All right, I'm gonna share my screen. Let's see.
Holly, I have to tell you, it's not snowing here in North Carolina, but it's a pretty miserable day anyway, so.
Yeah, okay, I think,
better here.
Hold on, are you seeing, not that, I wanna show from the beginning. Let's see.
Please see your PowerPoint.
Do you see my PowerPoint?
Yep, you're all set.
Okay, fantastic, all right. So I thought I'd start today by situating you all in the place where I work now, the Bell Museum, which is Minnesota's State Natural History Museum. We are not a new institution. We are almost 150 years old, and we were founded in 1872 by the legislature of Minnesota and charged to collect, preserve, and interpret the biodiversity record of Minnesota. We're quite proud to be part of the University of Minnesota. We moved into this brand new building. In fact, that picture is so new, like our landscaping hasn't even come in. We moved in 2018. And that new building included brand new exhibits, a state-of-the-art planetarium. And in doing so, and kind of moving from a more traditional, classic, dark, wood-paneled university-based natural history museum to this very bright and large new facility, we really had this opportunity to reimagine how we are engaging visitors in science, in nature, in space and astronomy. Part of that reimagining involved moving and restoring our world-class nature wildlife dioramas. They're quite famous because the artist Francis Lee Jaques, who is also he also designed a lot of the dioramas at the American Museum of Natural History. And so these have a lot of historical and artistic value. In our old location, they were installed again in this sort of classic window box way where a visitor would sort of walk from box to box to box. And typically they were arranged according to taxa. In our new building, we really had that, as part of that reimagining, we had the opportunity to install the dioramas in a new way that really sets them in their ecological context. And so now our visitors, instead of sort of walking through the birds or walking through the mammals, they get to take a walking tour through the biomes of Minnesota, starting in the North Woods, then moving through our prairies and savannas and on into our big woods and big rivers. I'll note for all those friends out there, that's my son Clifford when he was quite young. Cliff gets to be featured in a lot of Bell Museum photos. That was a highlight of his day because he got to meet Goldie Gopher for that particular picture. Okay, so everything about our building and our exhibits and our programs and our entire approach to public engagement really maps back to our mission. And we're very intentional about wanting to create meaningful experiences that map to mission. So our mission, at the Bell Museum, we want to ignite curiosity and wonder, explore our connections to nature and the universe, and create a better future for our evolving world. Now, as Director of Public Engagement and Science Learning, I get to oversee all of our interpretive and public engagement efforts. And so I lead a team now of about 12 people, and together we're responsible for exhibits. This is one of our highlights and visitor favorites, is our woolly mammoth. I oversee the planetarium. So it's a 120-seat digital planetarium. And we use this immersive space to take people to the far reaches of the universe, but that we also have recently started to explore inner space. And I'll be talking a little bit about that later, inside our human bodies. And then of course, public programs, and which is where I have a great deal of experience and enthusiasm. I'm just going to show you a few slides so you can get a sense of the range. So our public programs range from telescope observing, this was from a eclipse, no, transit of Mercury, sorry, last year. To day-long and weekend-long events, festivals. We also have something called Spotlight Science, where we're trying to create opportunities to bring together the public with scientists, community organizations, researchers across all career levels, and really inspire conversations and opportunities to have that two-way dialogue and excite people around a particular science topic. And I think those kind of events are one of the things that make me super excited to be at a university-based natural history museum, because we have sort of access and opportunity to connect with folks across all kinds of exciting areas of research, and then to bring those people to our visitors. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about all of our K-12 work. Let me just pause here and say that it's also weird to talk about the Bell Museum in some respects, and some of the pictures you'll see, because a lot of them represent what I like to call the before times, pre-COVID, and we can go into some of that later as well. But in the before times, we had a really significant school K-12 program, and we still are doing K-12 K-12 programs were not bringing students on site for field trips. Before COVID, we would see around 30,000 students, K-12 students a year. We also have a really significant youth summer camp program, but I just wanted to mention that too, so you could kind of get a sense of the breadth of the work we do. Now, my job at the Bell Museum is not my first museum job. In fact, when I was a high school student, I worked at the Cincinnati Museum of Natural History, now called the Cincinnati Museum Center, located in this iconic building in Cincinnati. Those of you who are longtime friends know that I'm enthusiastic about Cincinnati. And it was really in that place that I developed my passion and love and enthusiasm for natural history and communicating science to the public. I was fortunate enough to be part of a program called the Lab Rats program. If you were wondering why Lab Rats was in the title of this talk, I hadn't figured out to explain it. And Lab Rats stood for learning about biodiversity research and teaching science. And so all throughout high school, my job was to be on the floor of the museum, interpreting exhibits, doing hands-on activities, and connecting visitors to the content that we had at the museum. It was an incredibly formative experience for me. I think it gave me confidence in connecting with the public, helped me learn about communicating science at a very early age. And that experience working at the museum really opened my eyes to the possibilities of and the breadth of science, because I had the opportunity to meet staff scientists and curators, and that work there, interestingly, after I left there to go to college, really inspired me to pursue a career in science, pursue a degree in biology as an undergrad, and then pursue a PhD in ecology as a graduate student. Midstream of graduate school, my sort of career plans shifted, and I largely point to this critter, the 17-year cicada. I was at the University of Maryland in the Washington, D.C. area in 2004, when the brood 10 cicadas emerged, and being situated in an entomology department at that time, 17-year cicadas, periodical cicadas, are like Christmas for entomologists. And I had the opportunity to be part of a outreach team that in a major media market in Washington, D.C., and to really kind of get the public excited about cicadas, help them not to freak out, and maybe learn a little something too. And so it was really that experience that set me off and got me thinking about how might I carve out a career that's all about sort of engaging the public in science, translating science, connecting people to science. And so away from academia, or so I thought I went, and towards public engagement. One of the first things that happened after the cicadas is that, well, during the cicada emergence is when I really started doing media outreach. And so my first television interview ever in my life was live on CNN at 8:30 in the morning. Over the next few slides, I'm going to kind of briefly touch on some of my SciComm experiences over the course of my career. You will see me age through time, so we'll just be clear about that. But I hope my point in doing so is to share some of the insights and the takeaways that I learned through each of these different kinds of roles and experiences, and how all of those collectively have shaped my thinking about the public engagement science communication work I do today in the museum setting. So with regarding one of the really formative things about sort of doing all this media work, I think as a naive graduate student, I thought like, oh, I'll just bowl people over with my enthusiasm about cicadas, which I did, and that is powerful in some ways. But one of the takeaways I had through sort of these kind of interviews and subsequent interviews and talking to a lot of camera guys and reporters is that it was really important for me to make sure that I had a clear message. I knew what I wanted to say, what I wanted to communicate. I didn't want to just be on the receiving end. So as a science communicator, doing the pre-thought work ahead of time and thinking about what is it that you want the audience to take away? What are the one or two things that they ought to know after engaging in a conversation, whether it's mediated through a television screen or not with you? I went on after graduate school to work in science policy in Washington, D.C. Adam Fagan, I see you out there way back in the day. And I worked for the American Institute of Biological Sciences, advocating on behalf of non-medical biological sciences. And a takeaway there was for me and that work, we were working with lawmakers and policymakers, sort of advocating for increased funding for sciences. We were advocating for policies that would affect the ability of researchers to do their science. And frequently I had talked to a lot of people who didn't have background in science. And so key lessons there for me were about knowing your audience, knowing sort of what is the frame or the lens through which they're thinking about your work, and then thinking about your goal. What is it when you go in to talk about science? What is it that you want to have happen? Do you want to convince a lawmaker to invest more in NSF? Do you want to persuade behavior change? And I think the other pieces too is like thinking about how to be really clear about your message. And in DC, as I think everyone really knows now, there's a lot of talking from lots of different people. And so thinking about how you can communicate your message in a way that cuts through the noise is really important. I went on to work at Cornell University in Extension around invasive species issues. And there it was really a bridge between the research community and natural resource managers and policymakers, where we were trying to apply the science and our understanding about invasive species to real world situations. And so in many cases, we were thinking a lot about application. But we were also connecting to the public. And so again, thinking about what is our goal in talking about invasive species. We didn't want to fully freak people out. We wanted people to take action, both in the realms of prevention and then sort of mitigating the effects of invasive species. Moreover, I think in my work in extension, I really learned lessons about how to connect science issues to the things people care about. And particularly in the Finger Lakes region, aquatic invasive species are a big deal. People love the water and the lakes and really value those. And so as we were thinking about messaging to the public, particularly with the introduction of some new invasive species that we had a potential to control, sort of really connecting with people through the heart was really, really important. Then I came to North Carolina, and I had amazing opportunity to work with Rob Dunn and the team at NC State. And so for a couple of years, I had the privilege of coordinating a citizen science and outreach program that we called Your Wildlife, that was based out of Rob's lab. Our goal there was to engage the public in the study of the biodiversity in their daily lives. And we used citizen science. So we partnered with the public to generate new knowledge. And so through that experience, I could give a whole talk about our work with the Your Wildlife program, but it was a fantastic opportunity to really practice some of those, the engagement, where we weren't just a science lab pushing things out. We really wanted to have that dialogue with our audience. We wanted to engage them in the study of biodiversity, whether that was the microbes in their belly button, or the mites that live in the pores of their faces, or the crickets that lived in their basement, or the things in their backyard. I'll say moreover that my time working with Rob and our team with Your Wildlife was that I really learned the power and the value of storytelling. And I think Rob is a masterful storyteller, and I feel really lucky to have been mentored by him throughout that time. I stayed at NC State, but I was lucky enough to move to a new role. Hi, Dan Solomon. I see you out there too. I can't read the chat window, but I saw your name. Dan was the Dean of the College of Sciences and created a position where I got to connect with researchers across our entire college. And so I went from sort of being the person that was doing most of the communication to working with researchers across all kinds of career levels and helping them develop their capacity, their skills, and find opportunities to really connect with the public. And we did that in lots of weird and wacky ways, from the science circus that you see on the left to sort of developing and connecting with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, with the North Carolina Science Festival. Partnerships are really important in that work. The other thing I'll say about my time sort of directing public science at NC State is that that I was really also able, and I think one of the richest things about that experience was being able to connect across the humanities and the arts, and thinking about how through that collaboration, we had the opportunity to reach new audiences, to talk about, see, and engage people in science through in new and exciting ways. And that new audience and perspective was incredibly powerful. I was going through old slides and I couldn't help but include this one because it was just astounding to me on several levels, given where we are in this COVID Zoom world right now. While most of my work as the director of public science was really about facilitating public engagement on the part of our researchers at the university, I also have the opportunity to help organize and execute a number of large-scale public science events. And this was the Solar Eclipse from 2017, which was one of the last big hurrahs I had in North Carolina before I moved to Minnesota. I think this photo is astounding for a number of reasons. One, look at all those people standing next to each other, which I think tends to freak people out right now. But two, it was one of the most exciting, powerful, insane public science events of my life, and really instilled in me how sometimes spectacle and going big can be really awesome. And that's something that I've taken to my work at the museum, sometimes to the chagrin of my team, who may get a little overwhelmed because big things like this are really fun and exciting. Okay, so, through all of my roles while my roles have varied and the nature of my work has changed, I think there are some consistent sort of takeaways or things that I have about science communication, or about the consistent principles, practices, fundamentals of science communication that remain consistent through this work. Of course, know who your audience and what your goals are is consistent no matter whether you're talking on television or you're at a museum engaging the public. Knowing what are your takeaways, what's your main message that you want to communicate across to your audience. Storytelling is really powerful. So are things that make people go wow and excite them and draw them in. And connecting people on a personal level, making your work relatable and relevant to the things that people really love and care about is another important avenue in. And then finally, I'll just say that sort of engagement is the nature of the game. And so we know that the deficit model, this one-way push of information, doesn't work. And so thinking about ways where you can create opportunities for two-way communication, for conversation, for meaning making to happen, both on the part of the communicator and the audience that is receiving that. Jory, I assume you're going to yell at me when time, because I could go on and on.
I'm not going to tell you to stop talking. It's all fascinating.
I'm also a fast talker, sorry about that. I would layer on top of those sort of key things that I've learned over the course of my career, some new stuff that I've really thought about and have been important things for me to consider in my work at the Bell Museum. I think first and foremost, when you spend time in museums, and the literature bears this out, that people don't go to museums just because they want to learn something or to be educated, that often they go to be part of a social experience and to have a shared experience with their family or with their friends. And so being attentive to that the social experience is important. More so than in anything else that I've done over the course of my my career, sort of the value of hands-on learning and incorporating play. These are going to be duh to all the museum people in the audience. Michelle Clota, I'm looking at you. But I think until I sort of saw that in practice and was responsible for leading a team doing this work, I don't think I fully appreciated how valuable and important that is in the museum setting. At the Bell Museum, we are really big on trying to create immersive experiences for our audiences, things that help transport a person to another place or into another zone. I think the planetarium is the key place that we do that, but we've been experimenting with some other exciting ways. And so thinking about how our work can help transport people has been a really fun opportunity. And then the last thing I'll say is that particularly over the last 3 years, and certainly in the last few months, particularly here in the Twin Cities. I think a lot about how the work that we're doing can be made as inclusive as possible. And so thinking about, as you're creating exhibits and you're developing programs and planetarium shows, whose voices are you centering and representing? Is the work that you're doing and your content culturally relevant? How are you making programs and exhibits accessible to people with disabilities, people who may be on the spectrum, people who may be speaking other languages? And that's something that's been increasingly, and I think importantly, requiring a lot of time and effort and thoughtfulness. And so I just wanted to throw that out. Okay. So I figured, at museums, we're in the business of lifelong learning. And so, I'm a lifelong learner too. And so I thought I'd tell you a couple of stories or just share a couple of examples from my work over the last couple of years that I think applies some of the past lessons I've learned, and then create space for showing you how my thinking has evolved and changed or has been tweaked through that. So just a few weeks ago, we debuted a brand new planetarium show called Mysteries of Your Brain. And this was a Bell Museum original planetarium production. We produced it in partnership with UNC's Moorhead Planetarium and Science Centers. Those folks did all the amazing visuals that you will see on the screen. But this was a project that had culminated over the course of a couple years. It was my first production credit on a planetarium show, which for an entomologist was very exciting. And we were funded, we received funding to create sort of an immersive planetarium show targeted at middle school kids that used the planetarium's immersive environment to go into the body. And what made sense for us with that show was to really focus on neuroscience, partly because that is an area where the University of Minnesota has a great deal of expertise. And so we felt like this was a space where we could, we like to think of ourselves as the gateway to research at the university, and so showcase some of that work. And I'll have to say that as much experience as I've had in sort of science storytelling, going to the Dome is a whole different experience because you are completely your storytelling happens all around you, not on a flat screen in front. And so thinking about not just the script itself and the plot, but the visuals and the movement, and how are you going to capture the interest of middle school students over the course of 25 minutes was a real challenge and an exciting challenge. One of the interesting things in the course of the production of this show was that we worked with a team of science and content advisors who were hardcore scientists, neuroscientists. They both had experience in doing outreach and public engagement. But there was a lot of tension and a little bit of struggle at the start of the show's production because they saw this show as an opportunity to really help students learn about the brain. And so we're going to learn about the brain. We're going to walk through the parts of the brain, and we are going to label the synapses and the axons and the dendrites. But that doesn't work for a 25-minute planetarium show where people are buying tickets. And so where the expectation is that there is something that is both entertaining and exciting as well as educational. And so there was some struggle there and some learning that needed to happen about how do you tell a compelling story? How do you convey important scientific information, but do it in a way that's not like old school, or that isn't sort of the traditional textbook way to do that. What worked for us to kind of get past that moment was to really think about what were the key takeaways for that show? What did we want every kid who walked out of the theater to know? What were the 3 things we wanted them to know? And so we wanted them to know about like how the brain works, generally speaking, what makes their brain different from other animal brains, what makes human brains so special. And the third thing was that how do we have the power and the ability to change our brains. So I'm showing you these clips. These are just, so because it's a planetarium show, all the clips, they're not clips, they're screenshots, are going to be in this dome format, and imagine them going around you. The slide on the right is one of the exciting pieces of visual storytelling that had to happen, where there wasn't voiceover. This was a case where we were showing how action potentials move through the nervous system, and we take our audience on a roller coaster ride through and down the axons. I have to admit, I close my eyes on that one because it makes me motion sick, but that's okay. The other thing here that I learned through, that became important to us as we were developing the show, is again, where like representation matters and thinking about our audience. And so we did a number of test screens, probably midway through the production, where we brought in 5th grade students. And we showed them the show and we asked them lots of questions. We watched their reactions. And it became really important to us that our audience be able to see themselves in the character, the little girl, who is sort of the main guide through this particular show. The 2 main characters are this little girl and a crow, who's a very sassy crow, which I think is really fun. And so we, originally our little girl was pretty generic, and in the sense that you couldn't, but very stylized, and you didn't know like what race or ethnicity she was. And then we decided, particularly after talking to the students, that it was really important to us that the little girl was a Black girl, and that I think has really resonated with our audiences. On the right, this is just a point of pride, that we thinking about how to make a planetarium show where people have the expectation to go and learn about, think about space, but why is this in a natural history museum, a show about the brain? We had a section about amazing animal brains of nature. And as part of the storytelling, to keep people connected and to keep people interested, you have to be thinking about changing the pace and the dynamics over the course of the show. And particularly in this sequence, the animals and the brains that we feature kind of come out at you. And I was very pleased that one of the animals was, as an entomologist by training, was a jumping spider. And this jumping spider literally kind of comes out almost in a 3D way at the audience, and you hear people scream, which is really fun for me. Okay. Keep talking. Jory, where are we on time? Okay, I'm almost done, I promise. Okay, another kind of example of Holly's adventures and learning about public engagement and science communication in a museum is when I arrived at the Bell Museum, I arrived 6 months before we opened to the public in the new building, and I inherited a project where we were previous folks before me had determined that we were going to have a summertime makerspace in our changing exhibit hall when we first opened, but the concept hadn't really been worked out. And so I had about 12 weeks to develop, design, and implement a summertime makerspace. And that was a trial by fire, but it was super fun because what I could lean on was my experience working with researchers at universities and helping them connect their science to the public. And so the core concept around which we built this space, which we call the Solution Studio, was to create a makerspace that was different than the typical makerspaces you often find at science centers and museums, where they're really focused on tools like 3D printers and laser cutters and the like, but kind of take a step back from the technology and think about how might we use research at the university to inspire creativity and problem solving. So if you may, I'm going to try to do a little technology here. I'm going to show you a brief video to give you a flavor of the Solution Studio. So I'm going to stop that share. Hang on. Let's find this. Okay. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, we see the video now.
Oops. You probably can't hear.
No, we can hear.
My name is Holly Menninger, and I'm the Director of Public Engagement and Science Learning at the Bell Museum. The Solution Studio is our summertime maker space, and it's really focused on creativity and problem solving inspired by real research at the University of Minnesota. The Solution Studio is an immersive space that takes a visitor into the really exciting and cutting-edge research at the University of Minnesota. It allows the visitor to engage with some cool technology, and frankly, it just immerses them in creativity and problem solving writ large. They're using their hands to solve problems that are inspired by real research.
All right, in the interest of time, I'll stop. Whoops. Are we back? We're back. Okay. All right. So that just gives you a little bit of flavor of the layout and the design of the Solution Studio. So essentially, we developed it, so we created challenge stations where each challenge station told a little, had a brief narrative about a researcher, a research team at the university, and from that description, we drew out activities, a question, a problem that we then gave visitors materials and tools to use to help solve that particular challenge. And we worked with a team to develop this. We did this exhibit for 2 years. We weren't able to implement it this summer because of COVID, but we worked with we didn't work with a classic exhibit design firm. We worked with a group with experience in placemaking, and that made it pushed me and my team to think differently about how to design the space and how to engage visitors in this experience, and to really think about sort of what is the thing that's going to grab people, how to make sort of play and discovery and exploration a key part of that experience. And they moved me in many different ways. We can talk about that a little bit in the Q&A. The Solution Studio was wildly successful. We saw and observed intergenerational groups of visitors, so grandparents and grandkids, grandparents, parents, and kids, spending time working together on challenges, using materials in new and creative and exciting ways than we ever anticipated. And they spent a lot of time there. So our average dwell time in the Solution Studio for visitors was over 20 minutes. Which is pretty unheard of and was really exciting. I also, my biggest piece of evidence of success for this space was the fact that when we closed it, a week later, visitors came back expecting to see the Solution Studio. And we communicated that this was just a temporary exhibit. Children wept, and so that was my biggest indicator of success. What we weren't super successful on, I think, was making that connection between the activities and the work and the researchers. I interviewed a lot of families in that space, and a lot of times people were just drawn to the materials. It's a very colorful, bright, exciting space. People weren't reading the text, or even though it was short and eye-catching and having a lot of pictures, they weren't really taking away those connections or connecting what they were doing to the research that was what we were that had inspired that work. And so, like in this case, this weaving activity was inspired by a person in the College of Design who works with wearable technology and is making like responsive materials things like spacesuits and things for people with autism. They did not connect. And that was interesting, but then sort of the takeaway for me was like, isn't that okay? Does that matter? Because really what people were doing they were having a fun experience, they were being creative, they were solving problems, and in many ways they were acting like a scientist. And so at the end of the day, did it matter that they knew that Brad Hulsha was working on spacesuits and this by weaving using yarn to make a new fabric, that those things necessarily were connected? And I don't think it's changed my thinking in terms of how we draw that connection and what we center and place as important. Okay, I think I'm going to stop because I want to have questions. I could talk about COVID stuff and how we changed, but I don't think we need to unless people have questions. And so with that, this is my plug. Our statewide star party is happening all this week. There's the link, and I would rather have questions and just talk to people. I'm sorry I talked too long.
No, that's fine. That's great. Thank you so much, Holly. And actually, some of the questions that we received in advance, and I think one or two that I saw posted in chat actually focus on COVID and how you're
Okay.
dealing with that. So we'll get to that. But I went through all the questions we got in advance. I sort of put them into different buckets. And I want to start with a cluster around specifically advice for people who are interested in working in science museums and you know, questions about career paths to get you there. And one of the questions, I know the answer to this, the question was, did you have to get a degree in museum science to be able to make the transition? But can you talk a little bit about what you've learned about those types of degrees? When would that be useful for someone to pursue versus if they're coming out of a master's or a PhD in a STEM discipline, you know, can you make the transition to museum science without getting a museum science degree, or is it better to have that?
I think there's many different points of entry in, and I can say that for the positions that we've been hiring at the Bell Museum, having a degree in museum studies or is not a requirement at all. I think having experience in some way in informal science learning, and frankly, having experience in because we are a natural history museum, a science museum, having some experience in science so that you are rooted in the foundations of science, but that you have the ability to translate that to the public. I would say experience in informal science education, or we've also have on my team people who have experience in formal science education and experience understanding how people learn and the ways to how to connect, because I think there's many different within our organization that people bring all kinds of experience. And on my team, I appreciate having people with diverse experiences and perspectives, because then I think that's allowing us to develop a richer body of work. So I don't think you have to have a museum studies degree. You know, one of the interesting things for me when I was making the transition from, you know, working at like within a college at a university to a museum, and I was thinking about sort of longer term, I love museums. I wanted to get into that space. I was a little bit anxious having not had a museum studies degree. And one of the places that I thought made sense for me to make that leap was at a university-based museum, because I had experience sort of connecting, understanding how the university worked, working with researchers, and kind of bringing that to bear in the public forum.
Great. And a related question is, essentially, I'll paraphrase. The question is, how hard is it to get a job at a museum? I mean, how many jobs are out there? And I imagine that answer is very different now than it might have been 9 months ago, because I know museums are really facing some tough times. So can you just speak a little bit to what the, you know, opportunities are and how you think COVID has affected that?
Yeah, I think that right now the museum cultural institution sector is struggling because we had to be closed for many months, and now those of us who are reopened are open at reduced hours, and so from a revenue generation perspective, that it's tough when you had gone from 7 days a week to 4 days a week. And that we are very fortunate at our museum that we haven't had to lay anyone off. But that's not the case at a lot of other museums. A lot of other science and a lot of other natural history museums have had to furlough or do layoffs and really kind of contract to their core missions. And so right now it is, I would say, it's tough to find those positions. But it's not impossible. And I'll say that we actually have an open position right now. We're able to hire despite the university's hiring freeze because it's funded by, this position is funded by some external funds, but we're seeking a director of statewide engagement. So someone who would be a peer to me on our leadership team, who would be responsible for developing relationships and opportunities that really allow us to serve the whole state of Minnesota beyond the metro region. And, you know, so that we're connecting with people in Duluth and in Moorhead and across the state. And so there are positions that are open. I think that's where sort of plugging into the museum community, whether that's on Twitter or joining, the Aztec, the Association of Science and Technology Centers, just had their annual meeting, and there was a lot of energy and enthusiasm building around that, but they have a job board, and there's a lot of people connected in informal science ed that I have seen positions. I would give a plug for ARIS, your organization, who you were, the Advancing Research in Society, the group that Jory works with, is another place where there's opportunities to find career opportunities there. So they exist. They're just a little bit harder right now.
Thanks for the plug. And speaking of plugs, I already put the link to the Bell Museum in the chat. So if anybody is interested in learning more about that position Holly just mentioned, I'm sure you could get to it through following the link.
Yeah, you just go to the bottom of our website, and I think there's a hyperlink for jobs or employment. The position closes on Sunday though, so hustle.
So since we're sort of talking about COVID already, there were a number of questions we got in advance and then a couple in the chat. Can you talk a little bit about how you've adapted, how you've managed to maintain a connection to your audience, to your clientele in these COVID times? And there was a question in chat specifically about if you have data on it, what sorts of shifts have you seen? Are there certain people that are coming that are more engaged with you now that might not have been before? And are there people that you've lost that you haven't been able to get back in the virtual world?
Yes. Oh, I could give a whole talk about this. So, you know, my team was largely focused in the before times to driving people to come for experiences on site at the museum. So like in the physical space. And so when we closed on March 13th, we didn't have a digital programmatic footprint. And so my team did, in collaboration with our business and marketing team, who's responsible for communications, did an amazing job in about a 3-week period just of full-on hustle, creative hustle, to think about how might we continue to meet the needs of our audience, meet them where they are, engage them, keep the Bell Museum on their mind, keep them excited, and serving up the content that we knew they so much enjoyed. And so we took kind of a multi-pronged approach. The things that were important to us were what we call leaning into our Bellness. And so really centering, to the extent that we could, sort of research and research at the university, as well as like collections and connecting to the science that's at the core of who we are as an institution. Connecting, kind of using art as a way to connect through science. We have a strong thread there. And then thinking about how we can continue to, have tried to position ourselves as Minnesota's astronomy classroom. And so thinking about how we might deliver astronomy content when we don't have a planetarium, that we can do that. And so, and then of course, just like I think at a time that was really scary and uncertain, sort of helping our audience take a moment to like breathe and enjoy and connect to nature while they were at home was another sort of key piece of what we were trying to do. And so, and I'll be straight up, we don't have a digital media team. So like my team, we had crash tutorials on how to create videos. My public science events manager, Amber, who was used to throwing large scale public science events, all of a sudden became our Zoom technology guru and understood the ins and outs of Facebook Live and all of the live programs, much like I think everybody at museums across the country and the world learn to do. And so we kind of we got into a rhythm. And so through social media, through short spots on Facebook, and then delivering sort of virtual programs and content, we were able to really stay connected with our audiences. I don't have a whole lot of data about them other than we know that our reach expanded in ways that like we were having viewers and audiences from across the state, across the country, which was really exciting to us. from the, where we might typically have like a guest speaker or a lecture with someone giving a book talk on site at the museum, where we'd probably draw 100 people. Some of our more sort of adult kind of programs without lectures or kind of big, heavy, meaty topics related to science and natural history, our audiences were way bigger than anything we would have on site, and people would stay engaged. And then we really then sort of embraced this virtual medium. We're not doing public, even though we're open now, we opened in July at reduced capacity. We're not doing public programs on site because we don't feel like it's responsible to draw in large groups of people. We have timed tickets and limits on the number of people we can have in the building at any given time. And so, so we're continuing to sort of flex those creative muscles in the online space. And I think one really good example is with our statewide star party, where thanks for the inspiration, North Carolina, Amy Sale, I see you, where we tried to rally partners and communities across the state. Our first one was last year, to observe the night sky, participate in activities, and it was a weekend long experience in person last year. We're involving 30 different sites across the state, and this year we knew we were going to be virtual, and so we designed it to be virtual. And so we have this year 6 days of straight programming every night. We're on day 4 today. Where we feature keynote talks, different interactive experiences, Q&As with experts, and then live telescope viewing every night. And it's been super exciting. The link for that is z.umn.edu/SWSP-2020 for folks who want to catch the remainders of that. I'm hosting, I think, Friday and Saturday night.
Great. So we're running out of time, but there's a couple other questions if we can get to. At least one I thought was really interesting, which was, and especially for you, because you're trained as a PhD scientist and you worked at a university for so long, and now you're at a museum. And the question was, what's the best way to prepare scientists who want to start doing public engagement through museums? How would you work with a scientist, say University of Minnesota, who came to you and said, I'd love to do some public engagement through the museum?
I get those emails all the time, which is one of the most fun and exciting parts of my job. I think there's lots of different ways in, and they usually involve sort of starting with a conversation. I work with researchers, and my team works with researchers across career levels. And so for graduate students, typically our interactions start, either a graduate student will reach out and say, I'm really interested, and we work together to think about, does it make sense to do a gallery cart or to participate in a spotlight science event or a festival, some kind of low hanging fruit to sort of build a relationship there. We also do, for graduate students, workshops to help them think about and sort of develop those science communication and public engagement muscles. And that's something that I've done sort of throughout the different career hops that I've had. For researchers, one of the places where I think that's been some of the most fun has been working and partnering with researchers around the broader impacts portions of their grant proposals. And so typically a researcher, hopefully they'll reach out to me months ahead of time, or when they write. Those are the best kind and the best relationships we have. I have a lot of early career faculty that I've been able to connect, their colleges have connected them to us. That we've been able to have conversations to understand a little bit about their work, where their interests are, and what makes the best sense for connecting. So we can establish that baseline relationship and track record first. And then as they're starting to work on their grant proposals, we can develop something really rich. So I have a astrophysicist right now who has been a great partner with us for our Space Fest every year, and his students have supported some of the work during our regular monthly star parties, and has a new grant proposal going in. And in conversation, his work is about like the expanding nature of the universe. And when I was talking to him, it was I was struggling to figure out how we could connect this very challenging research to the public. And really the conversation opened up when I asked him, I was like, hey, Pat, why should somebody care about this? And I wasn't trying to do it to be offensive or like combative, but then it kind of took him out of the zone of talking to peers, because I couldn't hang with some of the astrophysics lingo. And thinking about, you know, by understanding the rate at which the universe is expanding and some of the conflicts in the measurements, and that tells us about sort of when the universe begins, which interesting, there's some interesting backstories of researchers. Through that conversation, we cooked up the bones of a live planetarium show that we could develop that is inspired by his work, and that's super fun. So to bring this all back, I would say to people who are interested in working with museums, find the person who's like me, and I know they exist. They're particularly those of you in North Carolina. You know, there's folks, I saw folks from the Museum of Life and Science, and I saw, I don't know if I saw anybody from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. There are folks from the North Carolina Science Festival. All of those folks working in that space sort of find opportunities to connect and participate, and develop a relationship first, and then you can have some really exciting opportunities to build on that.
Great. Well, we have a bunch more questions we are not going to have time to get to, unfortunately, because it's coming up on 1 o'clock here on the East Coast. So I think we need to wrap it up. But I want to thank you, Holly, so much for bringing all of your energy and enthusiasm and all of your great perspective and all the experience that you have in sharing that with our audience today. I'm sure everyone learned a tremendous amount. And as you all can see, you know, Holly, this is why I was so excited to have her. She just brings so much energy to everything she does. So thank you for being here and sharing that with us. Thanks to everyone who joined us from, we had people who signed up for this from Chile, from Malta, you know, all over the world. So thanks to all of you for being here. And as I said, we're going to be taking December off, give everyone a chance to catch their breath, but we will be back with a full lineup of monthly SciComm Lunch-and-Learns starting in January. So check out our website and we'll be announcing the lineup there. And we hope to see you all in January. Thanks for being here. Have a great winter break, everybody. And thanks again, Holly.
Thanks, everybody.